What is knowledge? Can anything at all be known? And if so, how? These are the core questions of the branch of philosophy called epistemology. The term epistemology comes from the Greek words episteme, meaning knowledge, and logia, meaning discourse. As you might expect, it is the branch or subfield of philosophy discussing knowledge. In my opinion, this is the most important and most fundamental branch of philosophy, because in order to seek true knowledge about anything, you need to figure out if it is even possible to know anything, and what is the best way to seek knowledge. The ancient Greek-speaking philosophers, such as Plato, devised what is now called the classical definition of knowledge. It is also often called the JTB definition for reasons that will quickly become obvious. According to this definition, in order for something to be knowledge, it has to fulfill three criteria. It has to be justified, it has to be true, and it has to be a belief. In short, in order for you to know something, you must have a justified true belief about it, JTB. While this may sound simple, some clarifications are in order. Belief here usually means propositional attitude. A proposition is a technical term meaning an expression, a sentence, a meaningful statement in words that a person can believe to be true or false. When speaking of abstract concepts, such as knowledge, philosophers often use the letter P to mean any proposition towards which a person can form a propositional attitude, such as belief. You believe that P if you consider P to be true. It does not mean that you have an incorrect opinion about P, or that you just have faith that P. Believing that P simply means that you accept that P is true, nothing more. Why you accept it does not matter for it to count as a belief. Also, for it to be a belief, it does not matter whether P is true or false. But for your belief to be knowledge, it does have to be true. Truth alone does not make a proposition knowledge, because knowledge is always someone's knowledge. Someone has to believe the proposition for it to count as knowledge. Also, you cannot know something and not believe it. Truth is actually a complicated issue on its own, and I will return to it later, but for now we can simply say that P is true if it is actually the case that P. The relationship between the truth-bearing proposition P and the truth-making state of affairs that obtains can be a bit more complicated, but we can assume that somehow P manages to correctly express what some part of reality is like. I will now mention that this is called a correspondence theory of truth, but like I said, I will return to theories about truth later. You may have a true belief about something without having a justification for your belief. In that case, you wouldn't really know it. You might just happen to believe the right thing by accident. But what actually justifies a belief? How would you know that what you believe is true? In some cases, you might think that your observation or experience warrants your belief. You see an apple on a desk maybe, and so you believe that there is an apple on your desk. This would probably normally be enough, but if we get a bit more philosophical, it might not be quite so easy. We could ask, how can you trust your senses? The belief in question can be more complicated or the observation more indirect, as is likely to be the case if we are talking about a scientific observation or an unusual observation or experience. In such cases, it quickly becomes clearly relevant to ask, how can you trust the observation, the instruments used, or even the inference from the observation to what you believe that observation means? In some cases, your observation may seem completely obvious to you, so that you don't have any reason to question it. You simply form a belief without even noticing. But you can probably remember times when you have realized that you actually experienced an optical or other illusion, an auditory hallucination, or a misrecognition. You may have thought you saw someone you know, only to realize moments later that it's someone completely different. You have probably misheard the lyrics to a song as well. Sometime later, you have been told what the artist is actually singing, at which point you may have been embarrassed to realize that you have been singing along to completely different lyrics. You can make observations, but you cannot observe the truth values of propositions. There are even fundamentally important things you probably believe in that you cannot observe, such as causality and time. I will return to those later. An observation does not guarantee the truth of your beliefs. It may play a part in the justification, of course. And having someone agree with your observations certainly seems to add to the plausibility of your belief. But do your observations really correspond to reality, as the correspondence theory of truth requires? Do they even correspond to the observations made by other people? How about other animals? How do your senses compare with the senses of other animals? The sense of smell a dog has is still a sense of smell. But how about the sonar of a bat? It goes beyond just hearing. Birds may be able to see or otherwise sense magnetic fields. Fish have the lateral line organ, which they can use to detect vibrations, the pressure and movement of water around them. Aliens in outer space, if any exist, might have some weird senses we can't even imagine. We have lots of instruments that can be used to detect a much wider part of the electromagnetic spectrum than our eyes can. What senses or instruments do you need to be able to have your observations correspond to reality? Is that even possible? And does that even matter? So far, I have been explaining knowledge as if it were a single kind of thing. But there are many kinds of things that may also be considered kinds of knowledge. For example, scientific knowledge seems different from everyday knowledge in some ways. More importantly, we might consider something to be knowledge that isn't even propositional. For example, there is know-how, the ability to do things, such as perform tricks or make things, that might have nothing to do with words. We might even be unable to explain how to do the thing, but we might be able to show how to do it, and even teach others to do it. Even if this knowledge can be expressed in words, it does not function as words. When learning a craft, verbal instructions may be needed, but after mastering the craft, the skills have been so internalized that no words are needed to perform it anymore. Propositional knowledge works in words so that I can explain epistemology in words, but if I perform things that I know how to do, I am not using words in any way, even in my mind. Trying to do that, to control your actions verbally, just doesn't work. Riding a bike has nothing to do with words. A concept related to know-how, but broader, is tacit or implicit knowledge, which is the kind of knowledge that at least at present is not expressed verbally. It can also be impossible to express it verbally, at least fully. It can be the kind of skill and wisdom that has been acquired over a long period of time. You may even be unaware that you possess this kind of knowledge because it is not something you have explicitly thought of. Transfer of tacit knowledge requires a lot of interaction between the person transferring and the one receiving it. When big changes are made in organizations, often involving firing employees or moving them to different locations and duties, there is a real risk of losing important tacit knowledge in the process. Organizational knowledge is a kind of knowledge as well. It is obviously different from the knowledge of a single person, because it's the knowledge of an organization. It can contain both explicit and implicit knowledge. It includes all the knowledge available to the organization, whether in its individual members, whole membership, groups or networks within the organization. Intuitive knowledge seems more important to other animals. Birds seem to be able to navigate without anyone teaching them, for example. A more controversial claim is that it is possible for some humans to attain mystical knowledge, such as knowledge about a god or about some alleged supernatural reality. I am not even trying to make a comprehensive list of different types of knowledge. There are different ways of organizing knowledge into types. For example, Antti Mattila and Seppo Nyyssönen list the following types of knowledge and examples for each of them in their book Filosofian ydin. General knowledge. Dogs are hairy. Particular knowledge. Dana is a boxer, a type of dog. Modal knowledge, the knowledge of possibility and necessity. Every dog will die. Conditional knowledge. If there is a thunderstorm, then Dana cannot go outside. Instrumental knowledge. If you feed a dog some fish, its fur will shine. Value knowledge. The Bible urges you to protect nature. Perhaps you can think of other types of knowledge yourself. If so, please let me know in the comments below. There seems to be a fundamental uncertainty about knowledge, at least as far as I can tell. This was made especially clear by the French philosopher René Descartes, also known by his Latinized name Cartesius. He was aware that we may be mistaken when we think we know something. He wanted to achieve certainty, to find something that he could definitely know without a possibility of being mistaken. The reason for wanting this was his epistemological view that for something to count as knowledge, it has to be true and there can be no uncertainty about it. He did not accept that anything less than that could be called true. He also subscribed, as rationalists often do, to an epistemological view called foundationalism, according to which all knowledge must be based on a small number of more fundamental beliefs or axioms, or be those basic beliefs or axioms. I will return to theories about justification in a later course, as there are, of course, several different opinions about that as well among philosophers. For the purposes of this lecture, what is important is that Descartes' views led him to seek absolute certainty. This search he called methodical skepticism. First, he needed to think of reasons why he might be mistaken. So he thought of things like hallucinations and dreams and how difficult it may be to realize that you are dreaming or otherwise mistaken in your beliefs, even if they are based on your observations or experience. But then he came up with a thought experiment that was even stronger. He thought how a powerful demon could actually be in control of all his experiences. Everything he has ever experienced could in fact have been just magical illusions caused by the demon. He could not be certain of even the existence of his own body. This demon argument is the strongest argument ever devised, as far as I know, against the certainty of knowledge. Descartes then thought that he solved the problem, but I don't think he did. His solution started with the realization that even if he could not be certain of anything else, he could be certain of the fact that he was questioning everything, thinking. From that he deduced that he must exist as a thinking subject. This is the meaning of his phrase cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. He then went on to come up with reasons why he could allegedly know other things as well, but his thinking beyond the cogito argument gets even worse. Other, much more recent thought experiments have involved a brain in a vat, BIV, which is being fed false sensory data, and a movie based on a similar idea called The Matrix, which I'm sure you have seen by now. The problem with the cogito argument, as it is called, is that it failed. At least I think so. Descartes was not in a position to claim that he knows he exists. He thought that the existence of the thought implied the existence of the thinking subject. But why should that be? Granted, that is how we experience thinking. It feels like I am thinking, that the thought has a subject, and even that there is a continuity of this subject thinking other thoughts. By the way, for Cartesius, even observations counted as thoughts. But what if the feeling of being a subject is just an illusion? Even if a single thought has to have a subject, and I'm not yet ready to accept that it does, certainly the feeling of continuity can be questioned. Perhaps thoughts do not have a continuous subject connecting them, but rather there are separate thoughts with their fleeting subjects under the illusion that they are connected to other thoughts. The point of this mental exercise is not to try to prove that nothing can actually be known. I am trying to say that it is possible to doubt just about everything and that certainty is out of our reach. But I don't see that as a bad thing. The whole point is to teach us not to cling to our beliefs too much, to always remember that we may be mistaken, because only then can we keep our minds open and ready to welcome new ideas. And that's important. In our everyday lives, we are constantly having to deal with reality with less than perfect knowledge. We are always in a state of uncertainty about most things. Instead of trying to fool ourselves into believing that we have attained certainty, we should learn to cope with epistemic uncertainty. That is a much healthier attitude and it will enable us to keep our minds flexible and open. But we must never forget to also think critically. Bye for now.